Welcome back to another episode of the Tunepact Podcast. I'm your host, the punk rock pop, Leigh Pierce. And today is part 2 of our legal issues in the music industry. And once again, we're joined by singer-songwriter, musician, and entertainment lawyer Bryan Kroes. And today we're going to be talking about just music business basics. Bryan, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing real good. So let's start off. So what's just some basic issues? What are issues and details that people need to think about what in the music business when you're getting started?
Sure. So, what I want to cover and really talk about today are a couple different things. First I want to talk about contracts. Once we're done talking about contracts, we're going to start talking about your company organization, your revenue streams, and then the importance of having a team. So, but let's start by talking about contracts. So contracts are one of these things where the music business is full of them. I mean, you've got your songwriter agreements, your record company contracts, your social media appearance contracts. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. They're very important because they do establish the rights and responsibilities of the parties. They also establish your payment and how you get paid. So they are, an essential element, but there can be some pitfalls. I mean, the music business is full of stories of people saying, well, I signed this contract and I didn't know I was giving away my rights. I didn't know I was signing away the ability to do X, Y, or Z, or to collect X, Y, or Z, or to own X, Y, or Z. I couldn't get out of my contract. These are the kind of horror stories that the music business is unfortunately plagued with. And it's not necessarily because, one side may be trying to be vulturous or anything like that. There probably are some of those scenarios, but what it is one side is trying to protect their quote unquote business interests, and the other side just doesn't maybe understand what they need to understand to become a business savvy musician, and then they feel like they got taken by a contract. So the first thing is if a contract is put in front of you, I very often will say, make sure that you get it in front of somebody who knows what they're doing. Get in front of a music attorney like myself. Get it in front of somebody to review it. And if you think if you don't understand something in it, don't sign it before you have somebody review it. You could be that person who's signing away the rights to your own song. There have been times in my practice where people have come to me and said, hey, I got this contract being offered to me. I would love to have you look at it and tell me what you think. And there are times where I look at the contract and I say, this is a phenomenal deal for you. Let's move forward with a couple, maybe some modifications. There's other times where I've looked at them and I've said, this is a deal that's going to affect your rights significantly, and you're going to have to make a decision whether or not you want to, for example, give up the rights to your song. Like, yeah, you wrote it, but now you don't own it anymore. And is that something that you really want to do? Or do you want to give up your rights to your autonomy? Do you want to be locked into something for a very long time that you maybe can't get out of? And I have litigated these cases. I've been involved in dispute resolution for these cases. And as long as you have a contract that has some protections for you and you at least understand what's going on, it should make the procedure a little bit easier. But what I say is memorialize everything. Memorialize the scope. By scope, I mean what you're doing for these people. Whatever the thing is that you're being asked to do, memorialize it. So if a record label is saying, I want you to release some songs, well, okay, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about a 2-album commitment, or are we talking about a single commitment? If a management company is saying, I want to represent you and I want to do some stuff for you, well, great, memorialize it. What kind of stuff are they doing for you? Is this exclusive? Is it not exclusive? How long am I working with you? Is there a provision in it where I can get out if things don't go well? And if things don't go well and we have to terminate our relationship, what does that look like? So, and then the money side of things, obviously. How am I getting paid? How often? And what does that look like? Because there's a lot of different ways that can go.
All right, so that covers contracts. Now, what about like company organization? What does that mean, and how does that relate to musicians?
Sure. So a lot of there are solo musicians who may say, I want to make this my business. I mean, realistically speaking, granted, I come from back in the day. I came from the punk world where anything that was considered business was considered selling out. And the funny thing is, most of the punk bands I listen to probably had their own LLCs or S corps. We just didn't know it. Because the dream is really to not have to be beholden to somebody else to make your art. You don't necessarily, not a punk, not a pop star wants to have to continue to work a menial job when they could be making a living out of their art. So at a certain point you have to say, well, I want to look at this like it's a business, like it's our job. And like I am the owner of a small business, which is kind of cool. It's like I am my own boss. I got my own autonomy, no gods, no masters, and I'm me. So if you're a solo person, maybe it could look one of two ways. It could be like I'm a solo songwriter, or I'm a solo performer, or maybe I'm a solo person who is the one constant in a band, but I may have a revolving door of people who are around me. I think Ghost, the band Ghost.
Yeah.
One main person, a revolving group of ghouls around them. So you could do a single member LLC in that case. LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. And what that does is it creates a wall between yourself individually and your assets and your band or your business and the assets of the band, and also all the things that can happen with the band. So the word liability in there is key, because now if something happens, you want to be able to shield your personal assets from your business assets. Just quick example, stage collapse, riot, something bad that happens at a concert, right? You're playing a show, the stage collapses, unfortunately somebody gets hurt or is killed. You will, as the musician playing on that stage, get sued. Even if you didn't erect the stage, even if you didn't own the property on which the stage was built, even if you weren't in charge of security or weather monitoring or promotion, you'll get sued. It's just a reality. And if you have an LLC and there is some sort of liability that's found on behalf of you, maybe you saw the tornado coming and you could have said, stop the show and get these people out of here, but you didn't. Now, if there is liability that accrues to your company, the theory is that liability won't go to your personal assets. They're not going to get your house. They're not going to get your cars. They're not going to get your bank account. The people who are looking at getting whatever kind of compensation will be limited to the liability that exists in your company. Now there are, this is where hiring an attorney does help for this kind of stuff, because you have to make sure that you maintain corporate formalities. There's a band called Pierce the Veil, and there's actually the legal concept of piercing the veil, which means piercing the corporate veil to get at the individual, get at the individual's assets. But the whole reason why you would have an LLC is to maintain that separation. And I gave the example, I started with the example of a solo. You could also do this as a group. If you were a group, you could start a multi-member LLC. And it's just going to be the same concept, just with multi-members. You can also do an S Corp. It's just, or a C Corp. Very rarely do I see bands doing C Corps. I have seen some entertainment entities doing S Corps if they're doing certain things. It's something that you want to talk about with your attorney and accountant to see, because there's tax implications behind all of those things. But if you are a solo, at a certain point, you may want to hire on independent contractors. I gave the example of Ghost before, not because I'm a fan, but because there was a case where some of the ghouls were considering them, or made an allegation that they had some sort of ownership in the business or the music, and there was a dispute that followed. It was publicized. I'm not quite sure how that dispute ended, but if there was something like an independent contractor agreement between the single member and those hired musicians, then it would establish what exactly they were doing and what they were entitled to or not entitled to. So with solo, it's easy. I know I'm flip-flopping back and forth a little bit. With a solo, it's fairly easy because it's you. With a multi-member, you're going to have an operating agreement. The operating agreement is, you're going to have an operating agreement with either, but you're going to have a multi-member operating agreement that really shapes the relationship between each of the different members and what happens in the event that somebody leaves, somebody dies, somebody gets married or divorced. In Wisconsin, we're a marital property state. So that means that if you are legally married or you have a domestic partner, that partner or spouse is entitled to half of your assets. And there are certain exceptions. So very often we have to work with that law and around that law to figure out what's going to happen in a multi-member LLC scenario. Because realistically, if you have a business going and somebody passes away and their spouse or significant other comes into the mix as a part owner, it could create an unanticipated consequence. So we have to just arrange for that stuff. It's just, you have to talk about it. You have to be upfront. Everybody has to plan. And I've had entire bands in my office before where we sit down and we plan. We ask the hard questions. What happens if somebody dies? Who keeps the name? So we talked about in our last series about the name. So if you don't have an operating agreement that lists off who actually owns the name, there could theoretically be some sort of dispute over who owns the name of this group. There's other elements, like somebody could maybe get kicked out as a member or leave as a member or stop using the name for a while, and you could use all those things as evidence as to why they're not entitled to use the name anymore. But the quickest, easiest way is to put in the operating agreement, the name goes with so-and-so. Yes, we're naming the band whatever it may be, but the name is going to always exist so long as so-and-so is playing music, regardless of where these other folks are. Or, on the other side of it, if any of us stop playing music together, none of us has a right to the name. Great. Either way you do it, at least you know who owns the name. You're also going to want to talk about who has the rights to the sound recordings. We talked about in our last session here about the distinction between compositions being the words and music and sound recordings being the embodiment of those. So if you have a bunch of people who are writing songs together, recording songs together, put in the operating agreement who owns those things. And then if you are also writing songs together, you're going to want to have another agreement that would be separate from the operating agreement that really lays out who owns what percentage in each song. So, there's a Nashville method, which is everybody that's in the room gets an equal percentage of the song. There's also other methods where it's like, okay, we're dividing it up. So-and-so owns 75, so-and-so owns 12, somebody else owns 5. There's these varying percentages based on their contribution. Either way you do it, you're at least going to want to have some sort of document, going back to the original idea of having a contract that memorializes how much each person owns.
Okay, thank you. That actually made a lot of sense. My next question is probably what everybody wants to know is, what about when it comes down to making money? When your bands start, whether it's the band, or it's the streaming, it's recordings, it's live, when you start making money, what do you need to think about it as a band or as a solo artist?
Yeah. So we talked about in the last session about how compositions are tied very often to publishing or publishing companies. We're talking about songwriting, not the physical embodiment, which is owned by a record label often. So in publishing, you could be a self-published person or entity, or you could be aligned with a company, a large publishing company, any of the big companies you can think of. But the way you benefit from that publishing is that, keep in mind my example I gave in the earlier session about Dolly Parton writing "I Will Always Love You," and then Whitney Houston cutting that song, and then me potentially cutting it, or Leigh potentially cutting it. Every time somebody cuts that song, Dolly Parton gets what's called a mechanical revenue, or there's a mechanical license that's enshrined under copyright law, and she gets some money for that. If it's a popular song, a popular enough song that every person wants to record it, that can be a significant amount of money over the years. Because not only are you making money off your own recording of it, you're making money off everybody's recording of it. You register your song with what's called a PRO, a Performing Rights Organization. So in the United States, there's 4, and I think there's a 5th one that's emerging right now. ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and GMR are the big 4 right now. ASCAP and BMI, anybody can join. CSAC and GMR, you have to get invited to. But basically what you do is you affiliate with one of these songwriting organizations, performing rights organizations. You register your songs with them. It's very simple. It's very intuitive. You log in. You create an account. You log in. You add all the information about your songs, and then it polls. The website polls using its own proprietary calculation method, which you can Google and find it. It's there's a bunch of different elements to it, but basically it's the theory is that you get paid a percentage of how much of your music is being exploited, and then you get paid. So I mean, it's very beneficial to at least do that, because you are getting paid for the exploitation of that song, the underlying composition. What kind of exploitation are we talking about here? We're talking about public performance. So being played in restaurants, bars, stadiums, grocery stores, not movies in the United States. Every other country, yes, but not the United States. Then all that money comes to you theoretically through your performing rights organization. You may have heard, if you here are a musician or a songwriter, you may have heard people, and I know I grew up hearing people saying, "Oh, the PROs are like the mafia; they're trying to shake us down." Those statements are usually coming from bar owners or venue owners who are misinformed, and it's always funny to me when one of those bar or venue owners pretends to or says that they are a musician advocate, or they're here for the musicians, but then in the same breath they say they don't want to work with ASCAP or BMI because they feel it's a shakedown. I think it's coming from a misconception. One of the most significant revenue streams you can have as a musician or a songwriter is through the PRO. And the way the PRO gets their money is by getting licenses with the very entities, so the bars, the restaurants, the grocery store chains, whatever public performance venue will have to give a license to the PRO, and that's how they get the money, and that's how they're able to pay the musicians and songwriters. So if you hear bar owners saying, "I don't think that, I think it's a shakedown, it's they're trying to just steal money from me," or something like that, which I've heard, they're simply just misinformed. The PROs are a way for songwriters to make money and make a living so that they don't have to work a menial job anymore. The MLC is a fairly new creation. It stands for the Mechanical Licensing Collective. So Congress recognized that the copyright code was not hadn't caught up with technology, and so terrestrial streaming had cropped up, and we had things like Spotify and Apple and Amazon and all these ways to stream music, but the copyright code didn't discuss streaming adequately. So Congress, through quite a bit of a process, created this thing called the Mechanical Licensing Collective, which debuted just a few years ago now, and the whole purpose was to basically identify streaming music and the owners of music that was streaming match those owners with the people who had been exploiting it, obtain licenses, and then pay people. And they've started paying people out, and some songwriters that I represent have been seeing significant paydays because now they're seeing streaming revenue where previously it had been the Wild West, where the streaming services could really do whatever the heck they wanted to. They didn't have to pay you on any schedule because there was nothing saying they had to. So the MLC is another one of those areas where you're really going to want to register and ensure that you've got adequate or accurate information in there so that you can start to collect streaming revenue, domestic streaming revenue. On the sound recording side of things, we're talking about sound exchange. Now, again, sound exchange is for sound recordings, meaning the physical embodiment of your song. So whether it's on an MP3 or a CD, or technically an MP3, sound exchange is going to pay you for that. So if you are a singer-songwriter, you're going to want to register for the PROs, the MLC, and sound exchange. If you are only a singer, so you don't write any of your own songs, there's not much of a benefit for you registering with the PROs or the MLC, but there is a benefit for you registering with sound exchange because you're going to be getting payment for exploitation of your recordings. And then the record label or the distributor is going to be paying you, if you are a performer, for the exploitation of, like, say, downloads or CDs or vinyl. There are places out there like CD Baby, TuneCore, DistroKid. I'm not advocating for any one of them, but they exist and they're fairly well known and easily accessible for people to just put their music in and distribute it out there to people so that people can download it and get it. Those things, CD Baby, TuneCore, and DistroKid, are not substitutions for sound exchange, the PROs, or the MLC. They're in addition to it. And there's also independent distributors out there. I mean, there's Selecto Hits down in Memphis. They're a phenomenal independent distributor that do much of the same that other distributors do. They just are a slightly different business model. So really what you're looking at is multiple revenue streams coming in, and you've got to identify all of them and sign up for all of them that are as applicable so that you're not leaving any money on the table.
All right. Well, so, the funny thing is, this is the second episode, and I'm feeling like such an old guy because the only actual music we've talked about is streaming, except for one comment about maybe finding a Nirvana vinyl at a Target or something. So we've covered streaming a lot, and which brings me to my next question, though. With the quality, I mean, I'm here at home shooting, and people have their home recording now because it's not hard. There's free software. Equipment has come down in price so much, so people are recording at home. And when it comes to watching out for yourself, one thing I know is overlooked is when you're recording, you've got those files on your computer, is the metadata that's in those files. And people overlook it so much. And I've heard horror stories about things that could have been completely avoided by just knowing what metadata is and how to utilize it. So could you give me a little basics on that?
Sure. So, yeah, metadata is information about your tracks, unique identifiers about your tracks or your recordings that are going to set them apart from others. So it's stuff that's embedded into your sound recordings, and you can embed it into your DDPs for digital. You can embed it into your CDs, and if somebody tries to if somebody burn or rips a CD, sometimes that metadata can be extracted as well. It all depends on how it's done. But either way, it's things that set your unique tracks aside from other tracks. ISRCs are independent codes for unique sound recordings. ISWCs are individual independent codes for compositions. And then there's going to be the track length. There's going to be the artist, the name of the song. All of those things comprise metadata, And so that when the things that we talked about before, the PROs, the MLC, Sound Exchange, they all have automated polling systems that are supposed to be collecting this data. And so if they find and keep in mind, it's all automatic. There's not a person doing this. There's not a person like searching out to see who's playing what. It's all, it's coming in, and there's quite a bit of AI in the mix lately, where, if we're matching up ISRC codes or ISWC codes and duration, artist, album, all that kind of stuff, it's helping to match those recordings with the owner, who is you. And then that helps you get paid. If you don't have all that stuff in there, you're leaving money on the table. You're not allowing all of those little feelers that are going out to match it in a way that's going to get you paid. And it could be that your stuff gets missed. There are... I remember for one of my old projects, I was looking at the MLC, and I found some other person's songs that were matched with mine. And I don't know if it had anything to do with the metadata, but I actually reached out and said, hey, I see that looks like the MLC matched some of my songs with your song, or some of your songs in my account. You may want to reach out and tell them not to. But when you have accurate metadata, things like that theoretically shouldn't happen, because it's a one-to-one match.
Okay, thank you. So, I met you when you were in a full group, all country group, mm-hmm. and now you've done the, kind of guns for hire. You've done solo stuff. So let's cover, I know it's important when you're in a music group to delegate, who owns what, whose responsibilities are what, and all that. But when it comes down to a solo artist, and especially as you're gaining success, a lot of people go solo because they don't want other people dealing with it. But as you gain success, how important is it to have a team to work with?
Sure. So, and realistically, this could be for solo artists or bands, songwriters, self-publishers, anybody that's in the music business, whether or not they are aspiring, new, established, whatever part of their career they're on, having a team is very important. So there's agents. Your agents are going to be like your booking agents. So the people that get you shows, make relationships happen so that you can continue to do your art. You're going to have managers. Those can be business managers or personal managers. They theoretically should be helping you to cultivate your brand, cultivate your image, again, making relationships happen, getting opportunities for you and things like that. They would be working with the agents. Your attorneys, like me, who address the legal side of things. So your contracts, copyright trademark registrations and enforcement, and legal business advice. And your accountants, who address your the money side of things. So your tax preparation and planning is very, very important, because the IRS does like to look at musicians with a little bit more of a microscope. And so all four of those, the agents, the managers, the attorneys, and the accountants, are going to comprise your ideal team. Now, realistically speaking, not everybody can afford all of those. Agents are very hard to come by, and not that hard to come by, they're selective. Managers, there are some phenomenal managers who only represent one or two people. There's also some really crappy managers who represent a stable of people. And so I've never said a manager is known, or I should say a manager's worth is based on how many people that they represent. It's really the opposite. It's sometimes the manager who's really just dedicated to one or a couple artists does the best, because they're not spread so thin. But in any event, having all those people that you can pull, that you can rely on, and then pull information from, and bounce things off of, are going to be essential for your business, for your entertainment business. If you don't have any one of them, it's not the end of the world. Sometimes a manager can act as an agent, although there are some laws about that in certain states like California. So keep in mind about that. But, there's maybe some overlap. Attorneys very often don't do pitching, don't do like manager or agent type services, although there may have been a misconception about that happening for a while. And there are some attorneys who may do some pitching, but there are certain ethical issues about doing that, because if you are an attorney and you're pitching music or pitching a project, very often it's because you have a relationship with somebody else, maybe the record label. And if you have that relationship with the record label, you're probably not going to want to destroy that relationship if something goes wrong. And so there's kind of this inherent conflict of interest in the pitching there, where your client only gets the deal because you have the relationship. Are you really looking out for the client, or are you looking out for your relationship? So, and if you can't afford an accountant, sometimes you can do that on your own too, as long as it's not too complicated. But I would say don't skimp on your accountants, because if the IRS comes after you, it's inevitably going to be more expensive. Same thing with the attorneys. Don't skimp on attorneys. If you can't afford them, I totally get it. But if you're being offered a contract, and you don't know what it says, and you skimp on an attorney, well, you very well could be signing away something that you didn't want to sign away. So that's really the importance of having a nice, robust team.
All right. Well, I can't thank you enough. We've spent 2 episodes, and you have been just educating me and the viewers and the listeners, and I can't thank you enough. This has been awesome. But I want to know about Bryan Kroes now. I want to know, because you're a musician, you're a lawyer. It's not a combination you normally see. I mean, you got to admit that. So I want to hear, tell me a horror story that could have easily been avoided if you'd known some of the things that you've educated us about.
Sure. So this is just a great horror story. So there was a metal band that existed. I can't use names. That's just it's confidentiality stuff. So I can't use names. But it involved a romantic partnership. So the 2 main songwriters were in a romantic partnership. They split up, and the one continued on with the band, and the other one didn't. So the one that didn't got mad and said, I'm going to hire an attorney because I want to get even with my ex. Well, under the copyright law, if you write a song with somebody, it's considered a joint work, which means that neither of you have exclusive rights to it. You each have rights jointly to the song. So, Leigh, if you and I wrote a song together right now, we both have 50% interest in that song. I can't stop you from doing anything with it, just like you can't stop me from doing anything with it. Well, this one musician, the one who left the band, hired an attorney who didn't know anything about entertainment law or copyright. So this goes back to the importance of getting your team. If you're getting an attorney, you got to make sure you get an attorney who's an entertainment attorney, not just a general practitioner. Well, this attorney, well-intentioned, don't get me wrong, this attorney helped his client to basically do this onslaught where they hired a PI who was also a process server, a private investigator who's also a process server, to go out to shows and issue cease and desist notices to the venues and the shows. They were approaching the band before they went on the stage, saying that if they performed any songs, they would be sued. They were approaching stores who were trying to sell the products where the products were being sold. And they were approaching radio stations, threatening the radio stations, saying that if they played the songs, they were going to be sued. Massive, massive mistakes, because, like I said before, you can't stop somebody from playing a song that you co-wrote, especially if they co-wrote it. Well, that's when I got involved. And I got this attorney on the phone, and I'm like, you need to read the copyright law and see what this thing says. I think they immediately recognized the errors that they had made and the devastation that they had created by, imagine, the venues don't trust the band now because why the hell is this person in here? Why is this process server in here bothering us? The radio stations are scared. The venues are scared. The record stores are scared. So they created a pretty wide swath of destruction based on complete misinformation. And we ended up using that as leverage. I can't talk about the settlement details, but it was a settlement that it worked out. But it's one of those things like, don't hire somebody on who doesn't know what they're talking about. And, don't try to assert rights that you don't actually have, just because you're mad, So, and it also, that horror story also goes to the importance of having things memorialized in a contract. If there had been a songwriter split agreement at the beginning, they could have worked it out at the beginning. If they, if things had been memorialized as they were going down the process of the band, operating agreement, for example, that could have also been addressed. So all the things we talked about today can be exemplified by that one example with that romantic relationship gone wrong in a metal band.
All right. So you've been a musician for a long time. That's how I met you, was playing in bands together, gigs and stuff together. So how has being a lawyer helped you as a musician, and vice versa? How has your experience as a musician and being on stage helped you with practicing law?
Yeah, so I mean, you need to know the area that you're practicing. So the example I gave with the metal band, and their attorney, didn't know the nuances of the music business and how things worked. I'm not saying everybody has to know everything about every area. There are certain things that you can learn, but knowing how the product is made, knowing how the industry works, knowing the terms, the linguistic terms, for example, knowing what's common in business, knowing what certain things look like that are average versus abnormal. Those things are all important, and you get that by being immersed in it. I couldn't go right now into the medical field and say how to practice medical law. I just don't know anything about it. I don't know the slightest. I mean, I've been to a doctor, but that doesn't mean that I know anything about it. So it really helps to be being a musician helps knowing all that stuff inside out. It is second nature. I'm also passionate about it. And so, there is something to be said about doing something that you're passionate about, because you give a better quality of service to your clients. If I didn't care, if it was something where I was just like, punching a time clock just to get a paycheck and going home, could that theoretically affect my my output? Yeah, it theoretically could, because I just, you've seen people, in every single industry, you get the person who's working at McDonald's and they hate their life. They're not ensuring that your burger is perfectly made. Same thing with an attorney. If they don't care, or if they're not passionate about it, maybe they're not going to put the same work into it. So being passionate about it, loving what I do, loving the clients I work with, and just the industry in general, and being an artist, it's all helped me, but it also has helped me being an artist advocate. And I do pride myself on being an artist advocate, which is kind of a unique thing in entertainment. So there are some folks who are they sway towards one side or the other. Because I'm a musician, I tend to really look out for artists' rights, whether it's in their own ownership of certain things, maintaining their rights, maintaining their autonomy, and their ability to continue to make a living based on their art. The last thing I want to see is somebody have to go back to working fast food or working a menial job when they are a phenomenal talent. That's just, it's terrible. That's unfortunately a byproduct of capitalism, but if we can empower our artists and empower our musicians to have the knowledge that they need via business, via the laws that support them and protect them, then we can start to move that needle towards that autonomy from entertainment, and that financial autonomy from entertainment rather than other types of work.
Thank you. Thank you very much for everything. I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on, and I know you've got a big project coming up. It's coming out here in a couple months. Will you take a few minutes to tell me about that?
Oh, sure, yeah. So, I said at the beginning of the first episode, that I'm also a musician. So, The Slow Harvest is my new project. It's Americana, alt country, folk, roots music kind of stuff. But our newest album, which is entitled Selections from the Sad Bastard Songbook, is going to be available everywhere on April 18th. So if you're seeing this before or on or after April 18th, check out The Slow Harvest. And for the legal side of things, you can always look up Hurtado Zimmerman SC in Wisconsin and find me.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to help us out here. And like I said, you definitely educated me, and I really hope that the listeners and viewers agree. We'll definitely have to have you back again. Once again, thanks for watching the Tunepact Podcast, and thank you, Bryan Kroes, for coming on and helping out.
No problem at all.
Take care and stay tuned for the next episode.